Today, we're going to talk about what I like to call the ABCs of insurance and dietitian private practices. So, buckle up for the most boring, but probably the most necessary conversation of your career in starting your dietitian private practice. My name is Sheena, and I'm a registered dietitian who has owned and operated my own private practice for the past decade. And this channel focuses on all of the things that you need to do to get started and be successful in your private practice. So if that is something you're interested in, definitely click that subscribe button. By the way, I drop new episodes every Wednesday, so you can stay in the loop on the next new things for your dietitian practice. So let's cut straight to the point that there is nothing exciting about billing insurance until you're holding that sweet cheddar in your hand at the other end of the process. But we need to do a few things first to get there. So I'm going to try to break this down from start to finish when you're working through both the credentialing process and actually submitting an insurance claim. So the first name you need to know about is something called an NPI. This stands for National Provider Identifier. And the link is right there as far as how you're going to get to the portal to get yourself an NPI. There are two types of NPIs. There is a type 1 NPI, which is an individual NPI. This is kind of like your social security number, and every dietitian should have, because the more dietitians that sign up for a type 1 NPI shows insurance companies that we are valuable providers and that our services should be reimbursed. If you've ever worked for another agency that has billed on your behalf, such as potentially a hospital, you probably already have a type 1 NPI. This is like your social security number, so this does follow you wherever you go. You will not get a new NPI if you just start your own private practice. Now, a type 2 NPI is a bit different. This is an organizational NPI. So this is for, say, hospitals, group practices, anyone that is going to be billing on the behalf of individual providers in that organization. So if you plan to have a group practice, or if you already have a group practice and you're contracting with insurance companies, you're going to also need a type 2 NPI. Pro tip: even if you don't have any providers working for you at this time, I would recommend that you contract with insurance companies with a type 2 NPI as well as your type 1 NPI versus just as an individual provider, because it makes it a little bit easier to just add providers to that organization in the future. Insurance companies are notorious for messing things up when it comes to trying to adjust basically anything. So if we just sign up for that type 2 group NPI to begin with, that makes things a little bit more streamlined when we're just going in to add providers. Okay, so the next thing that you're going to need to know what is called the CAQH. And to be perfectly honest, I have no idea what this acronym stands for. I'm going to assume it's something credentialing, application, something. That's honestly just a guess, and I don't feel like Googling that right now. The important thing is not what the acronym stands for, but what it does. So basically, this kind of serves as a central hub. It's not actually an application. It's just a space where insurance companies can go to collect information that you've already entered into a system and kind of streamline that contracting and credentialing process. By the way, when I was credentialing with insurance companies, I learned that these are actually two different things. Contracting versus credentialing are two separate processes that you need to go through both of these before you actually can start taking patients via insurance reimbursement. AQH is basically like a job application. I know I said it isn't an application, which it is not, but like one. So you're going to enter things like your NPI number, information about your practice, such as where it is, the hours of operation, is it accessible to people with disabilities, etc. And you're going to enter all of these details into the CAQH application. And then when you decide which insurance companies you want to contract with, allow them access to your CAQH. And sometimes this is all the information that they need from you to contract and credential with you. However, there may need to be additional things that you need to fill out for that specific company. So we don't want to assume that the only thing we're ever going to need to fill out is the CAQH to contract with insurance companies. But it is really nice that all these insurance companies have kind of streamlined this process, because we all know when we're applying for jobs and we're filling out 17 different applications and submitting resumes to 90% of those, plus filling out all the details, it can be extraordinarily tedious. So this does save you some work. So as I like to say, contracting and credentialing with insurance, while it is a pain in the behind, it is actually, honestly, in my opinion, easier than trying to find a registered dietitian job. Okay, once you have the CAQH filled out and you're actually contracted with, all right, now you are an in-network provider with insurance companies. What do you do and how do you actually submit a claim for a patient? So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to fill out a CMS 1500 form. I know it looks really scary. I'm going to drop a photo right there and you're going to see 973.8 boxes that you're going to need to fill out. Just kidding. You actually only need to fill out 2, maybe 3 of these boxes at any given time. Now, of course, you're going to need your practice information and all of those sorts of details in that CMS 1500 form. But the good news is that if you have an EHR system, which many of us as private practice dietitians should, that stuff is actually going to just be auto-generated in there. So you're not going to be filling out much at all for each patient that comes in. But there are going to be a few fields in that CMS 1500 box you need to fill out with each patient. And these are going to be what is called the CPT code. Again, I have no idea what this actually stands for, but that's not important. The important part is how do we use the CPT code? So for dietitians, there's usually 3, maybe 4 codes that we're going to use almost exclusively. They're going to be 97802, which is going to be your initial consultation, and then they're going to be 97803, which is a follow-up consultation, and 97804, which is a group session. So for example, if you saw a family or a group of individuals with diabetes, you're going to use that 97804 code. There's a couple other ones as well, but I don't use these as frequently, so I'm not going to discuss these here, but they can be for like single sessions and you're not necessarily using what is called units to bill for it. You're just billing per session, regardless of the number of units. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about that you're going to need to fill out is the units on that CMS 1500 form. So these can be 2 units, 4 units, 6 units. And what a unit is it's how many 15-minute intervals did you see that patient face-to-face for? Really important thing here, guys. The time you're waiting for the patient, if they're late, or that time you're filling out chart notes for that patient or talking to a doctor about that patient, do not count as part of that unit time. So anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes serves as 1 unit. And you're going to want to mark that accordingly on your CMS 1500 form. So for example, if you saw the patient for 26 minutes, that's going to be 2 units. However, if you only saw that patient for 20 minutes, because it's between 8 and 15 minutes, that is only actually going to be 1 unit. So if your sessions are typically 1 hour, that is going to be 4 units. And you're going to want to be very specific about that on your CMS 1500 form so that way you can get paid appropriately. And most importantly, not be fraudulent with the insurance company. The next thing we're going to talk about is called a diagnosis code. So a diagnosis code is what did you actually see the patient for? Was it diabetes? Was it an eating disorder? Was it kidney failure, etc.? So the doctor is usually going to be the person that is going to send you a referral with the diagnosis code on there. So you're going to want to hang on to that if you do have a referral from the doctor. The reason why is us as dietitians, we can't actually medically diagnose conditions because it's not within our scope of practice. So we do need to get that diagnosis code from the doctor with a few exceptions. So the exceptions are if you are using preventative codes or Z codes. We can also diagnose weight codes. So we as dietitians can diagnose weight and preventative. So a lot of times I will use the preventative code Z71.3 for many of my patients because of the specific type of work I do. I am able to use that code, and that's kind of that is a dietary monitoring and surveillance code. So it is that preventative code. There's something askew with this person's diet. We are providing a clinical intervention for that. You can also use the weight code. So if the person has a BMI of a certain number, that's going to correlate to a Z code for that BMI, and you're able to use that code. Those are all of the things pretty much that are going to need to go onto your CMS 1500 form. unless we're doing things like correcting a claim. Then we're going to need to fill out the box that we are submitting a claim correction, and we will oftentimes need to also fill out the original reference code on the original claim. So that way that insurance company can match that. Other things that we might be filling out on that CMS 1500 form is if, for example, the person has a primary and a secondary insurance. If the person is using their secondary insurance, we're going to need information from that primary claim and the information about how much was paid or if that claim was rejected to put on that secondary claim form. Now, that's a little bit more intricate than we really need to dig into in this conversation. And a lot of that work is actually going to be different based on which EHR system you're using and which clearinghouse you're using. So we're not going to dig too much into primary and secondary claims here, but we will talk about what they are. So what a primary and secondary claim is the primary claim is which insurance is responsible for that person's payment primarily. So when it comes to primary and secondary claims, this is when a person has more than one insurance. A really good example of this is husband and wife work at two different facilities and they're both on each other's coverage. And so they have two insurances. It is always primary. So for example, the wife might have Blue Cross Blue Shield primary and United Healthcare secondary. And where we tend to see a lot of secondary claims needing to go in is if, say, you're not contracted with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but you are with United, you're still going to need to bill that primary first, get rejected, and include that rejection information on your secondary claim in order for United to pay you. Or they might pay part of the bill and your reimbursement rate is higher with that secondary claim. And so we're going to want to submit that secondary claim. Honestly, this is kind of my least favorite thing to do. It's not hard, but it's another one of those messy, obnoxious things that just takes a little bit longer for you to get paid. Okay, and the next thing we're going to talk about is a superbill. And a superbill is basically if you are not in network with that person's insurance, or maybe you're not in network with any insurance plans, you can still provide the patient with that superbill. All of us can provide a superbill, but we do need that type 1 NPI as well if we're going to be providing superbills. And what we're going to add on to that superbill is just the name of the patient, the date of the service. Oh yeah, you're going to need the date of the service on your CMS 1500 form as well. And then you're also going to include that CPT code and diagnosis code. So we do still need to know about that if we're doing superbills, but we don't have to actually submit a superbill. We can actually just give that to the patient. And then kind of going alongside with where we submit things, this is what is called a clearinghouse. And so we submit all of our CMS 1500 bills through a clearinghouse. I do believe you can also just directly fax these to some of the insurance companies. I think it's a little different based on each insurance company how this is done, but it's way, way easier to actually just use a clearinghouse. So some common clearinghouses are going to be like Office Ally, or some of the clearinghouses that are used through platforms like, I think it's like Practice Better and Calyx. They have their own clearinghouses built in. There's a lot more clearinghouses, guys, and they range in fees or free. And if you do want to submit claims for free, like I said, you can fax them into that insurance company, or you can use a tool like Availity, which is oftentimes where you're going to do a lot of your submission for little ins and outs of insurance, and then also see what is called your EOBs, oftentimes on Availity, if those aren't mailed to you. Now you're saying, what is an EOB? Another acronym for us to remember, which is explanation of benefits. So basically, this tells us what you submitted as the charge for the patient, how much was reimbursable by that insurance company, and how much is the patient's responsibility or copay. So those EOBs, we do want to check those. We want to make sure that we submitted everything correctly, that insurance plan has paid us appropriately, because sometimes they do make mistakes and we want to catch those, and we want to make sure that that patient doesn't have any responsibilities. So such as a copay, or one thing that we didn't talk about is deductibles. And so deductibles are a number that the patient has to match before basically that insurance kicks in, if you're not familiar with insurance. What the EOB is going to tell us. We don't need to save our EOBs, especially if those are coming in paper format, something like that. We just kind of want to check them, make sure everything's paid, log that in as paid by the insurance company and whatever tracking system we're using. Another couple things that you might need are things like CMS.gov, which is the Centers for Medicare Medicaid. We're going to do some contracting there. I'm not going to dig into that too much because I haven't worked with those companies very much at all. It'll be a little bit different how you actually go about contracting with Medicare versus Medicaid. And one thing to know about Medicaid is it is state specific, and you actually, even though all of these individuals might have a Medicaid plan, you have to contract with each insurance company separately that is participating in Medicaid plans. So for example, here in Washington, we have Molina, we have Coordinated Care, etc. Each of those, even though they're all Medicaid plans, you have to contract separately with each of those plans. So hopefully that information was helpful for you. Review it a few times if you need. I promise it's not hard, guys. It is just getting used to the lingo in your mind of the way that these insurance tools work. Oh, and I did forget one thing. There's always little things here and there. Is what we call modifiers, and those are going to be if you are filling out the CMS 1500, what you're going to need to select a location of service. And so you can do an office, you can do a telehealth, etc. If you use telehealth, sometimes that is going to need what is called a modifier attached to that. So I guess that's another one of those boxes you need to fill out on the CMS 1500. I keep adding to it, but that's basically it for insurance. It may sound so simple at the end. It really is simple, you guys. Once you get the hang of this, it does take me less than 30 seconds to submit each claim. So for a full load of patients, 6 to 10 patients a day, it's going to be less than 10 minutes once you get the hang of these things. And it doesn't take very long. It is just that experience, the practice, seeing the different plans come in, etc. I hope that you found this information helpful for you. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with a friend.